we're off to Lockout, Tagout. So the usual question, why should you pay attention this morning? Well, believe it or not, machines starting up is a fantastic way to be killed or maimed or anything else. When you're doing work on something that can kill you, if it turns on, it really should be under Lockout, Tagout. So think about, lifting the bed on a truck and climbing underneath it. You don't want it to come down. Disconnecting wires on a sewer pump. You don't want someone to come and turn the breakers on or the SCADA turn it on and shock you. There's a lot of things we do that we really need to have it under lock and key. And the magic of Lockout, Tagout is only you hold the key to it turning back on. So as long as you're in harm's way, nothing happens. So what is this mysterious Lockout, Tagout? Well, in my language choice, I call it Lockout, Tagout. We lock the item out so it cannot turn back on. You can see in this picture here, the guy is locking out a valve. He needs to take a pump or something off. So he puts a chain on the valve so nobody will inadvertently turn that valve back on. He locks it out. Some agencies have a fancy name for it, control of hazardous energy. In the case of this pump or this pipe, the hazardous energy is the other pumps turning on and sending high pressure sewage into their atom. Or if you had your hands in the pump, pushing high pressure, backfeeding high pressure sewage through the pump and rotating the machinery while maybe you got your hands in, deragging the pump. You shouldn't put your hands in there anyway because it's probably a syringe. What it is a tool to prevent that release, an unintentional release of energy. It could be release from someone turning it on, or release from a SCADA turning it on, movement because it had momentum. There's lots of different types of hazardous energy. When we think Lockout, Tagout, we think of breakers and switches because that's probably that's in our thing. It's the most common one. So electricity, we lock it out. So you have to rewire a light. You shut the breaker off and put a lock on it so nobody inadvertently turns it on and shocks you while you're working on it. But there's other energies. There is chemical energy, and this is acids, bases, things that you don't want to mix. So chemicals are burst into flames. There's thermal. So if you're working on something that gets hot, that's a form of energy we need to protect us from. We can get burns. There's pneumatic pressure because that can move cylinders or rupture and cause other problems. Of course, hydraulics. So think of a backhoe or a loader. You got the bucket up. We put the safety in to keep the bucket from coming back down when we're underneath it. Hydraulic pressure is one. That's also a form of gravity. There's gravity everywhere, but the bed coming down or the bucket coming down is a gravity thing, so we block it out. So you see there's a lot of different types. So when you're doing work on something that can hurt you, you have to say what types of energy are going to bite us. So that dump bed we see up, let's say we had to reach underneath the drive shaft to pull out a branch we had picked up or something. If that dump bed lowered while you were under there, that would be bad. So we put that bar in. We raise the bed up, put the bar down, we have a positive lock on that bed. It cannot come down. We're not relying on the system hydraulics. What if you're working with someone else and they get in the cab of the truck and they're reaching for something else and they bump the lever? That's what we're trying to avoid. So Lockout, Tagout is preventing a breaker or disconnect from being inadvertently turned on. We all, treatment plant, there's always those breakers or switches that have the note on them, never, never, never turn this off. Well, if you're working on it, you're turning it off, but someone could walk in and go, oh, this is supposed to always be on, and flip it on, and you're on the other end of the line, and that's bad. It's locking a valve shut so you can't, and no fluid can get through there. So when is it necessary? Well, think of the different tasks we do day to day. We do cleaning, things where we're getting our hands in, like deragging a pump or putting the little hook in to pull it out. That's, if that motor turned on, that would be bad. We repair things. We take them apart. You service it. Check the oil. You put stuff in. We initially set stuff up. We make adjustment. Now, there are exceptions on adjustment because sometimes you have to have it running to do it. In your Lockout, Tagout program, there is going to be an exception that says you can run it during Lockout, Tagout, taking the lock off, but under certain controlled conditions. This is probably the one that kills the most people. unjamming stuff. You have treatment plant, we have the chain that pulls the debris out of the influent. And that thing's just going and it gets jammed with something. Somebody goes up and they're reaching in with a stick or whatever trying to get it out. And then suddenly they get that branch or whatever out and the machine lurches forward and catches them. Well, it should have been locked out or blocked out so it cannot move before we engage with trying to, unjam it. So jamming is a big area that happens. So the question is, do we always need to lock things out when we're doing things? Well, think of a flashlight. You got a little flashlight, it's 2 batteries. Do you need to put lockout, tagout on when you change the battery on a flashlight? It's electricity, it could be inadvertently turned on, but the answer in that case is no. Think about it for a minute. Does the voltage on a flashlight give you a risk? Or are you at risk of getting electrocuted from the flashlight? No, there's really no risk of injury if it were to inadvertently get turned on while you're servicing it. So low voltage stuff, low impact, things that won't hurt you don't require lockout, tagout. But let's say you have to replace this old breaker in this crusty old panel. You have to open it up, you got to pull the breaker out, you got to unscrew the wire, do everything else. Do we need lockout, tagout in that case? Well, in that case, the answer is certainly yeah. If that panel were to go live as you're reaching into those mangy old wires, trying to keep away from that Black Widow, you would certainly need to have lockout, tagout because it could be turned on and your hands are right there where you get caught. So tagout is a variation on lockout, tagout. So there are certain times where you cannot, for some reason, install a lock on the device. This breaker in the picture has a lock on the device. Great, that's lockout. But what if we cannot put a lock on it? So it's impossible. We can install a sign. It has to be an obvious sign, excuse me, that tells people, don't turn this on, don't move this because someone's servicing it. And that sign is supposed to, believe it or not, have a 50-pound removal. So it's not, a little sign with a piece of Scotch tape. It's a sign over the breaker with really big duct tape or something that it will not come off. It shouldn't be easy to attach. So it needs to be very strong. The material itself has to be strong and securely attached. That's that 50 pounds worth is the actual rating. But remember, if you can use lockout, you need to use lockout. So let's talk about who does lockout, tagout. So there are 2 types of people in this lockout, tagout world, just 2. We have the affected personnel. This is anybody who uses the equipment and they're told, hey, it's under lockout, tagout. Here's what a lockout, tagout looks like. Don't try to turn it on. Don't touch the equipment. Yeah, you normally use that equipment, but you're not using it while maintenance is in it. So we tell them to stay away from it. They don't install the lockout, tagout. They're not qualified or authorized to actually identify the sources of harmful power and lock it out. Their job is just to, just don't touch. Just stay away, just like your kids. Stay away. Their job in the training 101 for affected personnel, the first type of person, is never attempt to remove a lock or enable or start the equipment. Just stay away. So anybody that works around a piece of equipment that is under lockout needs to be trained to that level. Affected, because they are affected. They can't use that machine while you're doing it, and we need to tell them just don't try. The next type of person for lockout, tagout are the authorized personnel. And you can imagine what the difference is. These people are responsible for locking and tagging it out. They are authorized. Go figure, fancy names. They have to follow the energy control procedures that were identified for this piece of equipment. Remember, this person has to be authorized and qualified to lock it out. They have to understand what those sources of hazardous energy are, and they need to be trained to lock it out. Only authorized people can work on locked out equipment. Now, the thing about locking equipment out is if you and I are working on the piece of equipment, we put 2 locks on. I put my lock on, and I put my key in my pocket. And we put a hasp on that, you have to remove all the locks before you can take the hasp off. You put your lock on, and you put your key in your pocket. So until both of us remove our locks, and only we can remove our locks, will the equipment be able to be powered on. So if I leave the work site, I take my lock with me. And you're not nice to me, I'm going to take my lock and leave. So I take my lock, but since you're still working on it, your lock remains. So if 10 people working on this piece of equipment where they could be harmed, 10 people will have 10 different locks on the Lockout Tagout device. And here's one of the funny things about Lockout Tagout is it's designed for humans. So if I'm working somewhere and I have an expensive pump on it and I have a part out of it, I don't want anybody to accidentally turn it on during the 6 weeks it takes to get that new rare part from Germany. So I put a lock on it. Well, that's an operational lock. That's just to prevent people from using that equipment and potentially damaging it or whatever the case is. That's not actually Lockout Tagout. Lockout Tagout is when somebody is at risk. So even if that equipment is operationally locked out, the operator said, nope, we're going to lock it out, we're not going to accidentally use this piece of equipment, and I need to service it, I validate that they have it locked out correctly, and I add my lock, or in case of multiple energy sources, my locks to it, and the keys go in my pocket, and you would do the same. So I hope it's clear that everybody has their own lock on the device. If there's more than one energy source, everybody has a lock on each of the energy sources, and everybody keeps their own key. That's your safety. Now, so imagine that dump truck we showed a while ago. If you needed to lock that out, what is the lock? You're not going to put a lock on the bar, right? You take the key from the ignition and you put it in your pocket. That's your Lockout Tagout. No one can start the truck as long as you have the key. All right, so what kind of procedures are there? Well, we need to have that established by someone qualified in advance of locking a piece of equipment out. One thing Kalosha doesn't like is for us to make it up as we go. So we're supposed to have that procedure set written out. Turn off the brake, or actually turn off the handoff auto, turn off the breaker, install a lock, put a wedge bar between the, in the drive shaft to keep it from rotating. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and we lock that out, or possibly just tag that out because it may not be a way to lock it. So we follow that set of procedures. It is the employer's responsibility to make this procedure available for all tasks where people can be harmed, and it needs to be done in advance. Next, for Lockout Tagout use, it needs to be logged. Kalosha wants us to keep a log of when we put Lockout Tagout on and when we take it off. They want us to, become disciplined and very honestly, very formal about it, because it's a great source of death for workers in the field. So they want it logged. And then every year you need to go through the procedures and make sure you have the procedures for everything you need and that nothing has changed. If you change out the MCC and it's now, instead of just being a direct drive pump, it now has a direct drive and a VFD path with 2 separate disconnects. Well, Lockout Tagout says turn off the disconnect. You now have to say turn off both disconnects. Minor change, but at the end of the day, it could save you from being bit. So every agency needs to have a Lockout Tagout program, and it doesn't have to be super fancy, but it does have to essentially say, here's how we at our organization, our agency, is going to comply with Lockout Tagout. So it's basically, it doesn't reiterate the California or Kalosha laws, but it says, here's how we're going to incorporate them into our procedures in order to make sure that we lock things out and we keep our workers safe. All right. So here's some of the takeaways. When you're locking something out, install your own lock, use your own key. You need to have a tag on it. And this tag is kind of important because when I put my lock on, you put your lock on, and Jim puts his lock on, and Dave puts his lock on, there's 4 locks. 3 of us leave the site to go to lunch, and there's 1 lock, well actually 4 of us leave the site to go, and 1 lock left. Whose lock was it? Well, the tag should say who it is and how to get a hold of them. Now, if you're a small agency, 3 people, you could just put John, and they would know it's me. But if we're a big agency with 150 employees, I would need to put my name and my number on it. But the tag needs to identify whose lock it is so we can get a hold of them. Because what if we need to turn that piece of equipment on and we don't know whose lock it is? Can I remove it? Well, there's procedures for removing shall we call it an abandoned lock, but they're designed to be ornery. They're designed to be difficult and not easy to implement. We don't want to accidentally turn something on, so the procedures are very thorough. If we know whose lock it is John here? Call me on the phone. John, you left your lock on. What's going on? And I can explain it. Then the supervisor can get the spare key or the bolt cutters if need be and take that lock off. But short of that, we have to figure out who it is. Nobody is allowed to work in harm's way without a lock. I told you that one. You put your lock on, I put my lock on. I leave, I take my lock. You leave, you take your lock. But until both our locks are off, the equipment can't come on. Only you keep your key. And it's really important that you keep the key and that there's not duplicates. If you have a lockout tagout thing and they all use the same key, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? All right, so remember, when it comes to lockout tagout, you're alone. You keep the key. It's really important. You have the key to your own safety. And on that note, we made it. Woohoo!